I want to bring in to join us a special guest, Jillian Gilchrist, who is a feminist advocate from Connecticut. She champions public policy on issues of gender, gender-based violence, and reproductive choice. She's an organizer with the Women's March in Connecticut, and she currently teaches political advocacy at the UConn School of Social Work. Jillian Gilchrist is also she also wrote a column for her site in which she talked specifically about the idea that Judge Gorsuch would be terrible for women, and the reason that he would be terrible for women is because he's a proponent of originalism. Professor Gilchrist, are you actually a professor, or is it just Miss Gilchrist? I want to address you properly.
Hi, it's Ms. Gilchrist.
Okay, Ms. Gilchrist, thanks. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. So what you actually wrote is you wrote that Gorsuch, like Antonin Scalia, is a proponent of originalism, which means he believes a judge should attempt to interpret the words of the Constitution as they were understood at the time they were written. When the Constitution was written, women couldn't own property. In 1787, women didn't have the right to vote. It would be 133 years before women won that fight, a fight they fought for 72 years. Considering women had no rights when the Constitution was written and there was no mention of women in the Constitution, originalism is sexist. So let me ask you first to expand on that. Is it the Constitution that's sexist or originalism that's sexist, or both?
Well, actually, the original Constitution is sexist, and then the originalist perspective that actually looks to the original document is also sexist. And so we know that when a judge practices originalism, they look backwards. They don't try to see the Constitution in the current context of society. And so by looking backwards, as I said in my piece, at the time the Constitution was written, women didn't have any rights. We were property. So yes, the originalist perspective is sexist. And so I think Neil Gorsuch will not be good for women on the Supreme Court.
Two quick things. One, you're right, obviously. The women did not have rights under the Constitution in many ways. The idea that they were property is an overstatement. They couldn't be sold into slavery. I mean, black people were property. Women were not property under the Constitution of the United States. But I do have a basic question here, which is, what do you think a judge's job is? Right? I mean, a judge, from where I sit, and according to the structure of the Constitution, his job is to interpret the law as it's written, not to make up what he wishes the law were. That's what we have legislatures for. That's why we have people who vote on things. The idea that you're going to have some sort of super legislature made up of the great wise men or women who decide what a text means that has nothing to do with the original meaning of the Constitution. What do you think a judge's job should be?
Well, so what an originalist actually does, though, is goes even beyond that interpretation to an originalist thinks that the 14th Amendment, which would actually give women equal protection, based on what we know from Justice Scalia, he didn't actually think that that protected women. And so he thinks that equal protection does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. An originalist like Scalia also feels that the right to privacy is not included in the Constitution. And so I understand what a judge's job is, but then we also have, thankfully, the legislature. And so the legislature can pass public policies that will give women rights.
And to be fair, that's what Scalia says. I mean, that's what Robert Bork says. That's what Justice Thomas says. I'm an originalist. This is what originalists say. We say this is why we have legislatures. The purpose of a legislature is to pass things like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You don't have judges who just sit there and then pass legislation. This is why we have separate branches. So again, I ask you, you're upset at the outcome of some of what the judges say, because the judges are reading the text according to what texts mean. I mean, it's not poetry. But what do you think a judge should do that is distinct from what a legislature does?
Well, to answer that, I mean, what now is happening is, so the legislature passes a policy to give women greater access. Let's use Hobby Lobby, since that's a case that Neil Gorsuch, ruled on. The Congress passed healthcare reform to allow women to have greater access to birth control. And when that then went through the court process, because conservatives argued against that, when it went through the court process, it was ruled down. And so, we might have the legislature, yes, we have judges, but with an originalist perspective, like Neil Gorsuch's and like Scalia's, when we try to progress women through public policy, it then is still being shot down in the courts because that originalist perspective, as I mentioned, is a sexist perspective.
Okay, so again, the problem is that, I mean, take Hobby Lobby as an example. It wasn't that Neil Gorsuch is against contraception, presumably. I mean, his church apparently is pro-contraception. The idea that Neil Gorsuch has a personal view that's anti-contraception, that's not accurate. I mean, Neil Gorsuch's view is that there's a First Amendment to the Constitution which protects the freedom of religion of people like the religious owners of Hobby Lobby, and so that they don't have to violate their own religion in the provision of health care. Now, you may disagree with that policy. That's why we have an amendment process. So the Constitution does basically enshrine certain fundamental rights. If we disagree with those fundamental rights, there's an amendment process. Or do you think that we should just get rid of the Constitution completely? Because it seems to me that's sort of what you want. We shouldn't have judges. We shouldn't have judicial review. We shouldn't have a Constitution. We should just have a legislature that does all the things that you want them to do, or judges that just say the legislature can do all those things.
No, not at all. We need to pass public policies, or we could amend the Constitution. And
Right.
women did try that through the Equal Rights Amendment, but that too didn't make it through.
Right.
And so, to your point about Hobby Lobby, it is the first decision where two competing interests, the religious freedom, religious rights of individuals, did actually then trump the rights of those who need access to birth control. And so I think a different judge in that position who doesn't have an originalist perspective like Neil Gorsuch's wouldn't have ruled in that way.
How should a judge read a text? Should a judge just decide what the judge wants to be the law and then just say this is the law? Like, what standard do you use?
So my standard is that with the Constitution, I think it was supposed to be a document, a guiding document. And so I don't think anyone at the time the Constitution was written thought that the world would always exist as it was. And so I certainly think we need that text, but we should interpret it in light of what is happening in present day. We've changed a lot as a culture and as a society. And so to assume that you can use a text from hundreds of years ago to decide cases today just seems ridiculous.
Except that we do that with texts literally every day in the courts. We use the Sherman Antitrust Act to rule on antitrust. We use the Food and Drug Administration Act to determine what the FDA is allowed to regulate. Legislation is designed to be interpreted as text. You know, this is just basic legal 101. I mean, you're supposed to read a text as it's written, not as a piece of T.S. Eliot.
Yes, but we use that text to interpret current day problems. And it seems that when it comes to women's rights, originalist perspective tends to side on the air of always looking backward and not looking at current day.
Because if I wrote a piece of legislation 10 years ago and I said to you, okay, you and I write a piece of legislation today, right? And we use the language of today. We mean something by that language. In this conversation, somebody will read this 100 years from now, and we will have meant what we're saying to each other. We understand what we're saying. If somebody wants to read what we're talking about today, and then it turns out that all the words that we're using now mean the reverse because things have changed, did our conversation mean the reverse of what it meant, or does it mean what we're talking about right now? Words have meaning at the time they are said, and to try and read new meanings into old words just because, quote-unquote, times have changed, you can end up with some really bizarre results. I mean, and the problem here is that, you know, you may not like what Neil Gorsuch is trying to do, but at least it's a rule of interpretation. In the constitutional structure, what we've had is the Supreme Court very often reversing itself on the exact same language by using the sort of rules that you want. So, for example, in Plessy versus Ferguson, you had the Supreme Court say that the 14th Amendment did not apply to black people insofar as segregation was okay. And then 50 years after that, they say, no, it turns out the 14th Amendment actually meant that segregation is not okay anymore. Well, that's silly. I mean, it either meant one or it meant the other. It didn't mean two different things at the same time. One of those decisions is wrong and one of those decisions is right. That's true for every judicial decision. The idea that we can just look to our hearts to determine what a text meant 200 years ago is silly when we can find out what they meant 200 years ago by reading what they're talking about now.
And yes, I wouldn't disagree. Where you made the point, though, that our conversation we're having today, what we're saying to one another is what we're saying to one another. And if looked at 100 years from now, it would still mean the same thing. But people using our conversation 100 years from now would have to apply it to that current day because it's not going to look the same. And so we do need to look back at texts, but we need to interpret them with the current climate. And so to say that, I mean, Justice Scalia came out and said that the 14th Amendment does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. Justice Scalia came out and said that there is no right to privacy in the Constitution.
Right, because there aren't any of those things in the Constitution. If you want to establish one, you create an amendment. There's no right to abortion in the Constitution.
the right to privacy is not the right to have an abortion. The right to privacy also covers the right to access birth control. And so that...
Yes, Griswold versus Connecticut, 1965. I'm well aware of the case. But the idea that the founders, the people who wrote the Constitution, were deeply concerned with access to birth control in the federal Constitution is just silly. This is why this is why we have legislatures. The point is that I'm in favor of availability of contraception. This is why I would elect people who would be in favor of availability of contraception. If you just want the courts to do what you want them to do, why not just appoint a couple of oligarchs? We can have Ruth Bader Ginsburg be our queen, and then we don't actually have to have a legislature anymore. We can skip all these expensive election things. Donald Trump wouldn't be president, and the notorious RBG would just rule us all.
The problem for women in this country is that when we pass public policies to increase our rights, they are then shot down by the court, who doesn't believe what you just explained, that we don't have a right to privacy or that we don't have equal protection under the law. And so I don't want to...
That's not accurate. There are dozens of states that had already legalized abortion in large part before Roe v. Wade, and the courts had never struck that down on any grounds. I mean, now you're reversing it. I mean, the fact is that if a state legislature passes a law that makes availability of contraception a thing, that's still not the same thing as for example, Hobby Lobby, where you're actually forcing people to pay for your contraception in violation of their religious obligations. So if you're just talking about access to health care, then a state is perfectly capable of passing whatever law that it wants, and the courts won't strike it down. There are countervailing interests in some of these cases under the Constitution, and that's what the Supreme Court is talking about in an originalist jurisprudence. But if you want to pass a constitutional amendment, go for it. Again, I guess my final question is this, and I unfortunately have to let you go because it's an interesting conversation, but my final question is this. Why bother having elections? Why bother having legislatures? Why do you, if the American people are constantly doing things that are stupid, or if the American people are constantly electing legislatures that are terrible, and if we can just have judges who are going to be able to apply the Constitution as you see fit, again, I ask, why not just appoint Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the actual queen of the United States, and she can rule from above, and she'll do all the things you want? And why isn't that okay with you? I mean, tyranny with someone who you agree with seems okay with you a little bit.
Tyranny is never good, and right now I feel as though we're under a tyranny.
Why? What is it? Again, I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm just wondering what he's done exactly. But we can get into that in a bit. That
would be another conversation for another time. No, I certainly think checks and balances are what we need in this country. I'd end by saying what we haven't tried in this country is equal representation. And so maybe when we get a legislative body that is equally men and women, and we get a Supreme Court that's equally men and women, we might see
What about when we have an electorate that's 54% women? At that point, can we say that we have equal representation because most people who vote are women?
Nope, not yet.
Why not? What happened to the women? Are they all slave?
Well, we might have equal voting, but we do not have equal representation in any of our bodies of government. And so until we have that, I think we'll see a big difference in the policies and the rights we have as women in this country.
So a woman is not really a female voter if she elects a man? I'm confused again by
no, not at all. I just think that, to your point of should we have just a judicial branch ruling all, I was answering that. No, we need equal representation in all leadership bodies in this country. And so I was speaking to that piece.
Okay.
I think it's fantastic we have both men and women voting for both men and women.
Okay, so Ivanka Trump for president then. She's a woman, so yay.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking the time. Jillian Gilchrist, very kind of you to come on. Feminist advocate from Connecticut. She's at the political advocacy. She teaches political advocacy at the UConn School of Social Work. And if people want to find her work, what's the best way to get in touch?
Great. They can find me on Twitter at Jillcrest. That would be the best way.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so banks are in the business of lending. When they take the money in, they don't just stick it in Al Gore's fake lockbox. They actually lend the money back out to people to actually create new businesses and new products. You had an investor, right? When you started TYT, you were given $4 million by Buddy Roemer to start TYT. That's great. That's the way business should work, right? But that money it didn't come from a bunch of poor people buying hamburgers. It came from a very, very wealthy guy who gave you money to create a business a lot of people want to patronize. If you want better products and better services, you need more investment in the products and services. The basic name, trickle-down economics. The basic name trickle-down economics is not something that any conservative even proposed. It's a leftist revision of what economics actually is, because you're not giving me the money. It was my money in the first place, created through voluntary transactions that I had with others. I've not stolen money from anyone, neither have you. And the idea that money has to be forcibly taken from you and handed to somebody at the bottom end of the economic spectrum to somehow jog the economy, that may jog McDonald's, but is not going to jog all of the creation of the products and services that make all of our lives much better today than they were 30 years ago in terms of the stuff we have access to.
Cenk, I'll let you respond to that briefly, and then we'll switch topic.
Yeah. So I'll try to answer that as briefly as I can, and then I'll go on to your question. So when you talk about, hey, the banks they're not going to just keep the money, they're going to put it out and lend it to people, unless they decided to do their own investments, which is what they did because we repealed Glass-Steagall. So it's not as simple as, oh, I have money, so then I will now utilize it or I'll lend it out. So that is way oversimplistic. Speaking of oversimplistic, to say that, oh, well, they'll go buy hamburgers with it, come on.
You were the one who said
so
food.
The middle class is struggling right now, and we've turned this into a Walmart economy where people are getting $7.25, and that if you're getting around $10, I think that's about $15,000 a year. So that is serious pain and difficulties. So if you give those people money, it's not like, I just want to go get a hamburger.
No, they
desperately need that money, and yes, they will spend it all back into the economy. So that's an economic fact. And so, and Ben, for the 88th time, we have to find a balance where you have provided an incentive for people to save and invest, and you have provided an incentive for people to be able to put money back into the economy and to be able to live. And taxes is not stealing from you. So you're right, I run a business. So in order for my employees to get to my company, you know what they have to do? They have to drive on roads. Okay, so it's not stealing from me to build that road. That helps my business. They had to go to school. The fact that they went to public schools allows them to work for me. All these things are things that I benefit from. I didn't build that company by myself. Every single person that works there helped me to build that company. And that's what it means to work together. So to answer Steve's question finally, look, what is this Congress going to do on tax reform? And Ben and I disagree on this too, because we just talked about it a second ago. And this is just political prognostication, but I think that the Republicans will definitely pass tax reform. And the reason I say that is because the Republican Party at this point is completely dependent on their donors. And by the way, don't get me wrong, the Democratic Party is also largely dependent on their donors. I think the Republicans are a tiny bit more corrupt. But so I think that their donors are going to demand those tax cuts. And if I am right, and we'll all see this, because it's something that's going to happen later, not something that has happened, they will do everything. They will move mountains to make sure that those rich donors and corporations will get their tax cuts.
Okay. So this is an interesting case where I say to Cenk's prognostication from his mouth to God's ears, and he says about mine from my mouth to God's ears, because I don't think they're going to pass anything, because I think that there's a high-level incompetence inside the Republican caucus, and it's pretty fractious. But I do want to go back to a couple of points, because you actually hit on some major thematic points. You talked about roads and the fact that we need roads in order to get to work. This is a point Elizabeth Warren made, and obviously a point that President Obama made at the time. I don't think anyone argues that we don't need roads to get to work. The problem is that when you're talking about roads as a percentage of the budget, we are talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the federal budget and of the state budget and even of the local budget. So the idea that you're justifying massive tax rates on corporations in order to pay for roads is just intellectually dishonest. It's a tiny the stuff that we agree on that government should spend on is a tiny percentage of spending, right? It's all the other stuff that we disagree on. As far as the idea that I'm somehow being, dismissive toward people who are buying hamburgers, I'm not. I'm saying the people who are poor need to buy hamburgers to feed their children. They don't have the money to invest in building an iPhone, because when you're just trying to get by and you are living in a Walmart subsistence economy, you're using that money to buy the products and services you need to get by. That does not create new products and services that become cheaper over time through competition. You need somebody to make those investments. You said this about Glass-Steagall, for example. You said the banks, they might make their own investments. In what? In what? They're not investing in themselves. I mean, they have to take that money and then they have to use it to invest in something else. Places like Apple, some that fail and some that succeed. This idea that banks are somehow evils is just not the case unless you are talking about them working in Congress. Here you and I agree, working in congruity with a Congress, with a legislature that is attempting to give them kickbacks. Both you and I agree on this. So, and finally, as far as the idea that Republicans pass tax cuts because they're beholden to their donors, okay, and Democrats pass tax increases because the unions give them hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and I don't see Democrats complain about this.
So, you got me there. The unions give money to the Democrats. So, am I
Are you angry about that? I mean, does it upset you as much as, bankers giving money to Republicans?
No. The corporations give way more than the unions. So
it depends which corporations. That's not really
okay.
true.
Look it up. You can Google it. It's really easy. Do I object to taking out union money from politics? Hell no, I don't object. Take it all out. Take the union money out, take the corporate money out, take all the big money out. They're supposed to represent us and not the donors, no matter who the donors are. So, in terms of the question that you asked, Glass-Steagall, well, aren't they investing in things? No. I have a literal answer for you. Oftentimes what they do is financial derivatives. In fact, that's the majority of what they do. And financial derivatives is simply gambling. That's what crashed the 2008 economy. And what is so damaging about the removal of Glass-Steagall is now they could do their financial derivative gambling with depositor money. Boy, isn't that nice. They take your money and they gamble with it. And if they lose, well, that's a sad day for you. But if they win, they keep the profits. You know what that is? That's privatizing the gains and socializing the losses. So it's not that the banks are evil. Of course they're not evil. It's just that they're driven to make more money. Of course, that is the whole point of maximizing profit. So if we say, hey, banks, you're allowed to go and buy politicians, although the Supreme Court would say, no, they're just talking to them. They just gave them billions of dollars. They're just having a conversation, right? Just because they gave them billions of dollars, do they want something in return? Of course they want something in return. And that's our money. So what they got was laws passed by politicians to remove Glass-Steagall, and yes, Clinton and Gingrich, yes, both parties are guilty on that, but now the Democrats want to put it back and the Republicans don't, and they took our depositor money and they gambled with it. And if you thought if you gambled, you get to keep all the profits, and if you lost, it didn't affect you at all, you would probably gamble a lot of money too. And you would take a lot of risk until you crash the economy, and that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so
Ben, let me just add one piece of this question. You'll respond to it too. You've talked a lot about the corruption in politics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you may have noticed, if you're a Twitter person, that I was trending on Twitter today because it was a day ending in Y. My apparently very controversial comments were these. Apparently, I made 3 controversial comments yesterday. And I know that I made these because not only did I say them, I also went back and watched the tape of me saying them and then also read the transcript of me saying them. So here are the 3 points that I made yesterday. 1, I'm very happy that the U.S. women's national soccer team won the World Cup. Also, I don't really enjoy women's soccer because it is played as a lesser skill level than men's soccer, and very often at the same level as teenage boys. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2 was that the women World Soccer team does not deserve to be paid the same as the men's World Soccer team based on the amount of income they bring in. And I went through a lot of statistics. The fact that FIFA made $6 billion from the 2018 Men's World Cup and the Women's 2019 World Cup made $130 million. I pointed out the discrepancy there. I talked about the differences between contracts. So that was point number 2. Point number 3 was about Megan Rapinoe, who's this big star. She's a media star now. She was on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow. She was on CNN with Anderson Cooper. And I made the point that she is highly popular and being treated as a political figure because she is both excellent at soccer, a very, very good soccer player, and also because she's a very outspoken LGBT advocate, right? She's a very outspoken lesbian advocate, and she yells at President Trump a lot, and she talks about how America sucks and yells for the anthem. And the point that I was making there was that she is complaining a lot about a country that is making her extraordinarily wealthy, that treats gay people overall incredibly well. And she is evidence that the country actually treats gay people extraordinarily well. She makes millions of dollars while kneeling for the national anthem and being a very outspoken lesbian. She's not a victim, in other words. Well, this apparently made one particular guest, Lauren Duca, very angry. She tweeted out this. She tweeted out, LOL, F off, Ben Shapiro. If Megan Rapinoe is getting contracts for any reason other than her talent, it's because she just provided an entire generation of baby dykes with their awakening moment. Well, here to discuss it is Lauren Duca. Lauren, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, man, I'm so happy to be here because I'm confused as to how you seem to think that we agree on any of the 3 points you just said. And I'm excited to discuss, but I did want to tell you, I actually teach at NYU on Thursdays, so you are on speakerphone with my class.
Oh, hey class, how are you guys doing?
Hi guys. Hi.
Well, that's fun.
Okay,
how are you?
We're doing great.
Well,
Thanks
that's good.
for having me.
So, yeah, absolutely.
I'm interested because so it seems as if we got to talking to one another, right? Because you seem to say that we agree. But
no. So here's how we got to. So Lauren,
yeah,
I promise I'll let you talk. I promise.
Awesome.
Here's how this got started. This got started because Media Matters cut a clip of me, and then you tweeted, and this is the direct quote: "LOL, f off Ben Shapiro. If Megan Rapinoe is getting contracts for any reason other than her talent, it's because she just provided an entire generation of baby dykes with their awakening moment." Now, my point was that she was getting additional advertising contracts and getting additional prosperity and media attention because of what you're saying, right? Because she is a very outspoken LGBT advocate. You seem to be saying the same thing and then telling me to F off, and I'm confused.
You know what? I'm confused too because I think it's maybe I should clarify. I think it's very valuable, right, that Megan Rapinoe offers this level of visibility as a queer woman myself.
That's fine.
My heart is just, bursting out of my chest. This is something we don't really see, and it brought me to tears multiple times. And I'm so excited about it. And I think I have some criticisms of rainbow capitalism, but I love to see this level of acceptance around the LGBTQ community. And I am really excited about the fact that corporations think that an LGBTQ identity that is as visible as Megan's is valuable. So that's what I was saying. And it seemed to me that you were saying she wasn't deserving of her success because she is such a visible
No, that was
lesbian.
actually not my point at all, Lauren. I mean, if you had actually watched the entire clip, I can quote you from the actual clip. But so I can quote you the let me just for folks who don't remember. Sorry, Lauren again. Now it's Lauren. Now it's my turn. I let you talk there for like a minute and a half. So now it's my turn for like 30 seconds. I promise there's plenty of time. So what I actually said was that what was making me upset was that Megan Rapinoe's claim to fame right now is not merely her sexuality, her sexual orientation, which we've seen before, by the way. Abby Wambach famously kissed her partner in 2016 after winning the World Cup, right? I mean, so this is nothing actually particularly new.
I remember that, Ben.
Right,
that was so hot.
Oh, I'm all right. Well, in any case, the fact that she is a lesbian is part of the story. Part of the story is that she spent a lot of time complaining about the White House, the United States, talking about how the United States is bigoted and homophobic. The point that I was making is you are the beneficiary of an extraordinarily accepting system where corporations are indeed sponsoring you to make ads, where people are indeed celebrating you, where people are paying you inordinate amounts of money to do advertising contracts in a sport that, once every 4 years makes attention, but generally does not over the course of American sporting life. And so what are you complaining about? That is not me complaining that a corporation is sponsoring her. I may have complaints that I think corporations are engaging in exactly what you called rainbow capitalism, but that wasn't actually my complaint. So I'm confused what you're yelling at me about.
Right. So I think that the confusion comes from there being two very different hierarchical structures at play here. So the United States government is actively eroding LGBTQ rights right now. And there is a pay gap issue that has levels of advocacy that the U.S. women's soccer team is offering. At the same time, right, it seems as if these corporations see the LGBTQ identity that Megan Rapinoe so proudly displays as valuable. And those are two different things. Because I noticed in your clip, and I definitely did watch the whole thing multiple times. I didn't transcribe it, so you're ahead of me on that, but I did watch it.
Media Matters did, so you don't have to bother.
And what I saw in it is essentially that you were saying she is profiting off of victimhood. I mean,
yes.
I saw her with a champagne bottle and a trophy. I think that the thing that is happening here is she's celebrating the LGBTQ identity. Corporations also want to do the same, and this is happening concurrently.
But she's not only doing that, Lauren.
She's advocating against, which is the attack on LGBTQ rights that is coming from.
Well, she's not only doing that, right? She's kneeling for the national anthem, obviously. She is proclaiming that America is a widespread bigoted country. She's making those sorts. She's claiming that America is deeply sexist, and this is resulting in the female pay gap with regard to soccer, which is evidence-free. I mean, this has been fact-checked by everybody from the Washington Post to Snopes. There is not solid evidence that the women are being discriminated against in pay. If you want women's equity on the Women's World Cup stage, you're going to have to explain how it is that the Men's World Cup earned $6 billion in 2018 and the Women's World Cup earned $130 million in 2018 and in 2019, and the women and men are supposed to have the same prize money. If the men earned $400 million, men just generally, all the men's teams earned $400 million in prize money in 2018, the Women's World Cup teams earned $130 million. In order to receive the same as men, they would have to actually earn 3 times what the entire World Cup earned for the players themselves, which is just untenable, obviously.
Right. Okay. So I hear a lot of numbers, and I hear what you're saying, and that they are numbers. But I feel like at the crux of this is a question of, is the United States overall a sexist country? Is there a problem of LGBTQ representation?
Right.
And I mean, I think we can also say that her being so visible in the context of a complete lack of visibility is valuable, right? And
Lauren,
I'm
confused.
Hey, Ben, can
Sure.
I make
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure, go for it.
So you say something in the clip about we're being made to assume this is delightful, right? And you seem to find it obnoxious. But the whole thing is that she has built this level of public figurdom, and absolutely it includes a political element, right? And that it is being deemed valuable, and that perhaps it does. In fact, it definitely has to do with her identity as an outspoken gay woman. In fact, Ben, I think that's where we agree. But
so we do agree.
Aren't you saying that men's soccer is able to create a larger profit margin? What role does the white male identity play in that? It seems to me that where we differ, you think that it's okay to profit off of identities, but it's just a problem who gets to take home the money.
Well,
and I'm saying lesbians too, Ben, lesbians too.
So a couple of things there. One, you're right that I'm complaining that Megan Rapinoe seems to be claiming victimhood while earning millions of dollars for being a prominent lesbian soccer player in 2019, the month out, hold on, Lauren, I promise, Lauren, no, now it's my turn. Lauren,
the victimhood, though?
Lauren,
she's with a trophy and a bottle of champagne.
The victimhood is when, okay, Lauren,
yeah.
The victimhood is when she kneels for the national anthem and suggests that she and people like her are wildly discriminated against by American society. The month after Gay Pride Month, when every major corporation in the United States was openly advertising directly toward the LGBT community, and was making overt plays, not only for their money, but for their agenda, which is fine. That is their prerogative. It's America. That's fine. But here's the broader point. Are you really suggesting that people are watching women's soccer less because of sexism? Isn't it just possible that people are watching women's soccer less because it is not played at as high a skill level as men's soccer? It's the reason people don't watch the WNBA the same as they watch the NBA. Nobody can dunk in the WNBA.
Ben, this is so incredibly tired. You're making a biological difference about skill level on a playing field. I don't really feel the need to entertain that. I'm also not talking about
I know you don't want to entertain it, but why not?
I'm talking about publicity and acclaim and the level of a public profile that is achieved.
She's getting plenty of attention.
In accordance with whatever identity the player has. And we do tend to celebrate, right? We tend to celebrate men in athletic spaces way more than women. And that's why this is so refreshing, right? That's why this is such
Serena Williams is pretty well celebrated.
To you, Ben, because we're so used to seeing men get celebrated.
No, I don't find Serena Williams obnoxious. I do find Megan Rapinoe obnoxious.
Different.
Okay, Lauren, I find a bevy of female stars non-obnoxious. I find Megan Rapinoe obnoxious because she's kneeling for the national anthem while proclaiming that she is somehow victimized in a society where she's worth an enormous amount of money, has an enormous amount of fame, is in fact a political figure, appearing on Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper. And again, why won't you?
Can you tell me about the bevy? I'm trying to get more into sports.
Sure.
But honestly, can you tell, who do you love? Like, who are your?
So Serena Williams is the greatest female tennis player. So Serena Williams is the greatest female tennis player of all time, right?
I think greatest athlete. What do you think about that?
She is not the greatest athlete of all time. She would lose to a good college men's player, but she's the greatest female player of all time.
Ben, I feel like what's that? Is that based on fact or
Yes, no, that is based absolutely on the United States tennis rankings. They actually have a way of creating a metric.
That Serena Williams would lose a tennis match to
No, that's based on Serena Williams actually losing to 2 men, one of whom was smoking at the time several years ago at the Australian Open. I mean, Serena Williams has admitted this. Lauren, I'm sorry we're out of time. This is an 11-minute segment. I tried to give you as much time as possible. I appreciate you stopping by, though. Hope to do it again.
Debate Club, Ben.
Hey, thanks, Lauren. Be well.
Sooner or later, they're going to have to come out of college and live with the reality of life and making a living and doing these types of things. There's enough kids in the millennial that have now come out of the colleges, how are they faring? What are they doing?
I mean, they're faring poorly. They're shocked. I mean, they're kids who are now suing their colleges. This is an actual lawsuit. Suing their colleges because they're saying, I was promised a job, I was promised an income after I come out of here. Right? The Occupy Wall Street movement was all disenchanted college kids who got out after that lesbian dance theory major and thought they were going to make six figures somewhere. And it turns out nobody pays to watch people theorize about lesbian dance. So, you know, so they end up, you know, going and living in tents in Central Park and pooping on themselves. Life is a rough teacher. What the left has tried to do is extend kind of the period of adolescence indefinitely, right? So now you're 26 and you're on your parents' health care. Okay, by age 26, I'd been married for a couple of years, and I was 2 years away from having a kid, and I already had 2 degrees and 4 published books. You know, it turns, and by the way, that's actually, I'm not even a success story if you go back 50 years, right? 50 years by the age of 26, you were supposed to be fully ensconced in your job. You're supposed to have like 3 kids by that point. What we've done is prolonged adolescence indefinitely. And so what Obama's goal is, what the left's goal is, what Bernie Sanders, Hillary, they have the same goal. And the same goal is to extend college out. Right? College is not a place that's kind of a break from reality. College is the new reality. So we have to make all of human life like college. And this is what they think Europe is, which is why Europe is Europe is going to collapse. And it's being invaded by foreign forces, and the barbarians are at the gates. And Europe is going to fall apart, and it is falling apart. So we can play this game, but it's not going to end well. And the problem is that because the education is so poor, instead of reacting against their teachers at college who told them everything was going to be hunky-dory, instead of having the kind of all quiet on the Western Front moment, you know, where the former student goes back to his classroom after World War I, he's in the middle of World War I, he goes back and he yells at his professor and he says, you're telling all these kids the wrong thing. You're telling them that war's awesome. Instead of them going back and yelling at their professors, they say, no, it just shows my professor was right because society is unjust. Right? The lack of my $100,000 salary, that's because society is mean, and so we have to transform the society. And that's why young people, again, 40% back speech codes in American life. This is why I think the last poll was nearing or over 40% of young people are okay with socialism, like the actual socialism, because they don't know anything. They've been taught stupidity, and how they feel is all that matters. I mean, there's a video that's going around the internet getting all sorts of play about income inequality. Income inequality is the stupidest issue. Income inequality means nothing, right? I mean, I have a lot of income inequality with Bill Gates, but I'm doing pretty well, and I don't care that Bill Gates is doing really well. The only thing we should all care about is that there are poor people. We should figure out how poor people can do better, not how to make Bill Gates less rich. But this video is going around and saying, here's a poll of what Americans think the wealth distribution should look like, and here is what the wealth distribution actually looks like. And I watched this video in bewilderment, and young people love it. And I watched this video in bewilderment saying, who told you that you get to tell the universe how wealth is distributed? Right? Who told you that you have a moral say as to how wealth is distributed? It's immoral, it's evil, it's wrong. You're going to have to steal people's labor from them. But people are not told this, and so they think that their own subjective vision of what reality should look like should govern what reality actually looks like, and it's only later, after 80 years of communist failure, that they realize, oh, and hundreds of millions of people dead, that they realize, oh, that was a bad idea.